convenience store's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Officer Ryan Mitchell and his team conducted their routine patrol in the predominantly black neighborhood. The store owner, Mr. Jenkins, watched nervously from behind the counter as 3 police cruisers parked outside his establishment. Ryan entered first, scanning the aisles with practiced efficiency. 4 young black men stood near the drink coolers, their casual conversation dying as soon as the officers walked in. The tension in the air was immediate and thick. "Evening, gentlemen," Ryan said, his hand resting casually on his belt. "Mind if we see some ID?" One of the young men, Marcus, spoke up. "We're just buying drinks, officer. What's the problem?" The situation escalated quickly when another customer, dressed in casual clothes and reaching for a sandwich, turned to observe the interaction. This was Amir Carter, though Ryan didn't recognize him. "Is there a reason you're harassing these young men?" Amir asked calmly, placing his sandwich on the counter. Ryan turned sharply. "Sir, please step back. This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does," Amir replied, pulling out his phone. "I'm Commissioner Amir Carter, and I'm wondering why you're demanding ID without probable cause." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Ryan's partners exchanged uncomfortable glances, but Ryan himself stood his ground. "Sir, put the phone down and step back from the counter." When Amir continued recording, Ryan made a decision that would change both their lives. "You're interfering with police business. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." The young men watched in shock as Ryan handcuffed their new police commissioner. Outside, phones emerged from pockets as passers-by began recording. Amir maintained his dignity even as the cold metal closed around his wrists, his eyes locked with Ryan's. "You're making a mistake, Officer Mitchell," Amir said quietly. Ryan led him to the patrol car, trying to ignore the growing crowd and the chorus of angry voices. As he closed the car door, his phone buzzed. The caller ID showed his captain's number. "Mitchell," he answered, watching more people gather around the store. "What the hell did you just do?" His captain's voice crackled through the speaker. "Do you have any idea who you just arrested?" Ryan's stomach dropped as realization dawned. He looked back at the man in his patrol car, now the center of dozens of camera phones, and understood that his career, and possibly the entire department, was about to face a reckoning. "Get back to the station immediately," his captain ordered, "and pray we can contain this before it hits social media." But as Ryan looked at the growing crowd, all holding phones pointed at him and the commissioner, he knew it was already too late. Within hours, Wugger Commissioner in cuffs was trending nationwide. Mobile phone footage from multiple angles showed Amir Carter's dignified composure during the arrest, contrasting sharply with Officer Mitchell's aggressive stance. News channels played the clips on repeat, each iteration fueling growing public outrage. In his holding cell, Amir Carter sat alone, his suit jacket folded neatly beside him. He hadn't called his lawyer yet, despite having every right to do so. Instead, he watched through the bars as officers hurried past, their worried glances telling him everything he needed to know about the chaos unfolding outside. "This isn't just about me," he wrote in a notebook borrowed from a sympathetic officer. "This is about every black person who's been profiled, every innocent citizen intimidated by those sworn to protect them." He was already formulating a strategy, recognizing that his personal humiliation could become a powerful catalyst for change. Meanwhile, in the precinct's conference room, Ryan Mitchell faced a panel of increasingly agitated superiors. The police chief's face was red with contained fury as he paced the room. "Do you understand what you've done, Mitchell?" the chief demanded. "Our first black commissioner in office for less than 3 months, and you arrest him for buying a sandwich?" "Sir, he was interfering with..." "Interfering?" The chief slammed his hand on the table. "He was questioning your harassment of civilians, which is his job." The department's PR representative interjected, her voice tense. "The mayor's office is demanding immediate action. We're implementing emergency sensitivity training, starting with Officer Mitchell's unit. Ryan sat rigid in his chair, his jaw clenched. With all due respect. Respect? A senior officer laughed bitterly. You just showed the whole country exactly how much respect you have for authority and civil rights. Outside the precinct, crowds were gathering. Community leaders organized an impromptu rally, their speeches echoing through megaphones. This is what we've been talking about, one activist shouted to cheers of agreement. Even a police commissioner isn't safe from racial profiling. When Amir was finally released on bail, he emerged from the precinct to face a wall of cameras and microphones. He straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and approached the podium that had been hastily set up. What happened to me tonight, he began, his voice steady, is something that happens to countless citizens every day. The only difference is, I have a title that makes people pay attention. The crowd fell silent as he continued. I'm not interested in personal vengeance or in demonizing any individual officer. What I want is systematic change. Starting tomorrow, I will be launching a comprehensive review of our department's practices, training, and cultural biases. As Amir spoke, Ryan watched from a window above, his stomach churning. The commissioner's words were measured and professional, but they carried an unmistakable weight. This wasn't going to be a simple disciplinary matter that would blow over in a few weeks. This was going to force every officer in the department to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their institution. A text message buzzed on Ryan's phone. Mandatory sensitivity training starts tomorrow, 8 a.m. sharp. Attendance is non-negotiable. The sensitivity training room felt suffocating to Ryan Mitchell. He sat in the back row, arms crossed, as Dr. Sarah Jenkins, a civil rights expert, began her presentation. The room was filled with uncomfortable officers, many shooting sideways glances at Ryan, the reason they were all there. Today, we'll hear directly from members of our community, Dr. Jenkins announced. These are real people with real experiences of police interactions gone wrong. The first speaker was a middle-aged black woman named Patricia Williams. Her voice trembled as she described being pulled over 17 times in 1 year, despite having no violations. Each time, I wondered if I would make it home to my children, she said. Ryan shifted in his seat, recognizing the familiar traffic stop protocol she described, one he had performed countless times. Across town, in a community center packed beyond capacity, Commissioner Amir Carter conducted his first public forum. The crowd spilled out onto the sidewalk, everyone eager to share their stories or show support. My son was arrested for walking home from work, one father stated, his voice breaking. The officer said he fit a description. He spent the night in jail before they realized their mistake. No apology, no explanation. Amir documented each testimony meticulously, building a comprehensive picture of the community's experiences. The patterns were clear: arbitrary stops, excessive force, and a persistent undercurrent of fear. Back at the sensitivity training, Ryan found himself increasingly isolated. During the lunch break, he sat alone, watching his fellow officers cluster in small groups, their conversations hushed but animated. Officer Sarah Chen, a rookie who usually looked up to Ryan, approached his table. Maybe they have a point, she ventured carefully. My parents came here as immigrants. The stories these people are telling, they remind me of what my family went through. Ryan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. We're doing our jobs, Sarah. Someone has to maintain order. Is that what you were doing at the convenience store? She asked quietly, before walking away. The afternoon session featured a young black man named Marcus Thompson, the same one who had been in the store during Amir's arrest. His presence was not a coincidence. Dr. Jenkins had specifically requested his testimony. Every time I see a patrol car, my heart races, Marcus explained. I'm a college student, never been in trouble, but I've been stopped and searched so many times I've lost count. That night at the store, we were just buying drinks after basketball practice. But to Officer Mitchell, we looked suspicious. We always look suspicious. Ryan felt the weight of every eye in the room. His face burned as Marcus continued, describing the fear and humiliation of repeated stops. For the first time, Ryan couldn't dismiss these experiences as exaggerations or isolated incidents. The pattern was becoming undeniable. After the session, Dr. Jenkins approached Ryan. "Officer Mitchell, your engagement today seemed minimal. Are you finding it difficult to connect with these perspectives?" "I'm here because I have to be," Ryan replied stiffly. "But these people don't understand what it's like on our side. The split-second decisions, the constant danger." "Perhaps," Dr. Jenkins suggested, "that's exactly why you need to listen harder. Understanding goes both ways." As Ryan drove home that evening, he passed the community center where Amir's forum was just ending. The crowd was dispersing, but their energy was palpable. Signs reading "Justice for All" and "Reform Now" dotted the sidewalk. For the first time since the incident, Ryan felt something crack in his certainty. The weight of all those stories, all those faces, began to seep through his defensive walls. The police department's annual community outreach event couldn't have come at a more volatile time. Inside the community center's main hall, tension crackled like static electricity. Ryan Mitchell stood near the refreshment table, watching Commissioner Amir Carter work the room with practiced diplomacy. Local news cameras captured every moment as Ryan finally approached Amir. The room seemed to hold its breath, conversations dying mid-sentence. "Commissioner Carter," Ryan began, his voice tight, "I wanted to apologize for—" "Save it, Officer Mitchell," Amir cut him off, keeping his voice low but firm. "An apology without understanding is meaningless. You're sorry you arrested me because of who I am. But what about the thousands of others who don't have my title to protect them?" Ryan's face reddened. "Sir, I'm trying. Is that what you call showing up to sensitivity training and sitting there with your arms crossed? My office receives the reports, Officer Mitchell. Your participation has been minimal at best." Their exchange was interrupted by shouts from outside. Through the windows, they could see two groups forming, one supporting the police, the other demanding reform. The division that had been simmering in the city was now boiling over. Back at his desk later that night, Ryan found himself clicking through news articles about police brutality. Each headline felt like an accusation. He opened a new tab and typed, "Racial profiling statistics, police departments." The numbers stared back at him, challenging everything he'd told himself about good policing. His phone buzzed with messages from fellow officers. "Don't let them break you, Mitchell. This whole thing is a witch hunt. Stay strong, brother in blue." But as Ryan scrolled through social media, he saw Amir's latest post gaining traction. Reform isn't about attacking police. It's about making our community safer for everyone. When citizens fear those sworn to protect them, the system is broken. The comments section was a battlefield. Finally, someone speaking truth to power. "These liberals are destroying law and order. Mitchell should be fired. Back the blue. Mitchell did nothing wrong." Ryan closed his laptop, his head pounding. The certainty he'd carried throughout his career was crumbling. He remembered Marcus Thompson's words from the sensitivity training. "We were just buying drinks." Such a simple action, yet Ryan had seen threat instead of humanity. At home, he pulled out his service record. Commendations, citations for bravery, letters of appreciation. But something caught his eye, a pattern in his arrest records that he'd never noticed before. The demographics told a story he couldn't unsee. His phone buzzed again. A text from Officer Chen. "Hey, found this article about implicit bias in policing. Thought you might want to read it. We're all learning here." Ryan stared at the link for a long time before clicking it. As he read, the wall he'd built between us and them began to show its first real cracks. Outside his window, he could hear distant chanting from protesters. The city was changing, and he faced a choice: change with it or be left behind, defending a system that maybe, just maybe, needed more reform than he'd been willing to admit. The fluorescent lights of Conference Room B hummed overhead as Ryan Mitchell and Amir Carter sat across from each other, part of the newly formed Police Reform Task Force. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Let's be clear," Amir began, spreading documents across the table. "This isn't about making you comfortable, Officer Mitchell. This is about real change." Ryan nodded stiffly, his eyes fixed on the papers before him. Statistics, incident reports, and community complaints formed a damning narrative of departmental bias. "I want you to tell me why you're really here," Amir pressed, "and don't give me the department-mandated answer." The silence stretched for several uncomfortable moments before Ryan spoke. "I've been looking at my arrest records," he admitted. "The patterns. They're hard to ignore." Amir leaned back, studying Ryan's face. Then, unexpectedly, he shared a story that would change everything. 10 years ago, before I joined the force, I was driving my daughter to the hospital. She was having an asthma attack. Amir's voice remained steady, but his hands tightened around his coffee cup. "I was stopped by police. The officer insisted on running my license, registration, even called for backup. By the time I got her to the ER, she nearly..." He paused, composing himself. "She nearly didn't make it." Ryan felt the weight of the story settle in his chest. He thought about his own daughter, about what he would do in that situation. "I had a different perspective once," Ryan found himself saying. "Growing up in rural Minnesota, my only interaction with Black people was through TV and news reports. My father..." He stopped, then forced himself to continue. "My father told me there were good ones and bad ones. I never questioned it until you arrested me," Amir finished. "Until I saw the look in your eyes," Ryan corrected. "The same look I've seen 1,000 times but never really saw." The conversation shifted after that. They spent hours reviewing police protocols, identifying points where bias could creep in. Ryan shared insights from street-level enforcement, while Amir brought perspectives from both sides of the badge. "Every traffic stop, every random search," Amir explained, "builds a wall of distrust between police and community. We need to tear down that wall." As they worked, other officers occasionally peered through the conference room windows, some supportive, others suspicious. The department was watching this unlikely collaboration with mixed emotions. Near midnight, as they prepared to leave, Ryan asked the question that had been nagging him. "How do you do it? Work within a system that once treated you like a criminal?" Amir considered the question carefully. "Because change has to come from both sides. We need officers who understand the problem and are willing to be part of the solution." As they walked out of the building, both men realized something had shifted. Not friendship, exactly, but understanding, the first real step toward meaningful change. The town hall meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m., but by 5:30, the auditorium was already filling up. Local news vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes reaching into the darkening sky. Inside, Ryan Mitchell and Amir Carter prepared for their first joint public appearance. "Remember," Amir advised, adjusting his tie, "they're going to try to pit us against each other. Don't take the bait." Ryan nodded, watching through a gap in the curtain as more people filed in. Signs were being raised, some supporting police reform, others defending traditional policing. The division in the room was physical. Reform supporters on one side, police supporters on the other, with an empty aisle between them like a demilitarized zone. The meeting began smoothly enough. Amir presented the initial findings of their task force, with Ryan providing specific examples of how procedures could be improved. The atmosphere was tense but controlled until the doors burst open. A group of counter-protesters marched in, led by retired Officer Frank Martinez, known for his hardline stance against reform. "This is a betrayal," he shouted, pointing at Ryan. "You're throwing your brothers in blue under the bus." The room erupted. Supporters from both sides jumped to their feet, shouting across the aisle. Security guards moved toward the disturbance, but Ryan reached the microphone first. "Frank," his voice cut through the chaos, "I used to think like you, that questioning our methods meant betraying our values. But look around this room. These are all our people. Every single person here deserves to feel safe in their own community." Amir stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Ryan. "Officer Mitchell isn't betraying anyone. He's showing real courage by acknowledging that we can do better, that we must do better." Frank pushed forward. "You're both living in a fantasy world. You think criminals care about your sensitivity training?" "This isn't about criminals," Ryan responded, his voice firm. "It's about the innocent people we're supposed to protect. People like Commissioner Carter's daughter, who nearly died because an officer decided protocol was more important than a child's life." The room fell silent. Frank faltered, looking around at the sea of faces. Black, white, brown, young, old, all watching intently. Amir seized the moment. "We're not here to attack the police. We're here to make policing better, safer for officers, safer for citizens. But that can't happen if we're divided." Unexpectedly, a young black woman stood up from the reform side. "My brother is a police officer," she announced. "I worry about him every day. But I also worry about my son every time he leaves the house. We need both sides to understand each other." The tension in the room began to shift. Other voices joined in, sharing personal stories from both perspectives. What had started as a confrontation was transforming into a dialogue. As the meeting concluded, Ryan and Amir found themselves surrounded by people from both sides, asking questions, offering suggestions, and most importantly, listening to each other. Outside, local news cameras captured what would become an iconic image: Ryan Mitchell and Amir Carter standing together, taking questions from a mixed group of citizens. The physical divide in the auditorium had disappeared, replaced by small clusters of people engaged in earnest conversation. The campaign for comprehensive police reform launched with unexpected momentum. Amir Carter's office became a hub of activity, with Ryan Mitchell now a regular presence, bringing street-level perspective to policy discussions. Their unlikely partnership had become a symbol of possible change. One morning, they visited Lincoln High School together for a community outreach program. The gymnasium was packed with students, their faces reflecting the diversity of the city. During the QA session, a 15-year-old black student named David stood up. "I get nervous every time I see a police car," David admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "Even when I'm just walking home from basketball practice. How are we supposed to trust you?" The question hung in the air. Ryan stepped forward, remembering similar words from Marcus Thompson during sensitivity training. But this time, instead of defensiveness, he felt understanding. "David," Ryan began, "I used to think that fear was the problem of the person feeling it, that if you weren't doing anything wrong, you had no reason to be afraid. I was wrong." He paused, making eye contact with the teenager. "Your fear is real, because the experiences that caused it were real. We're here because we want to change that." Amir watched as Ryan continued to engage with the students, noting how his former adversary now spoke with genuine empathy. During lunch break, they sat with a group of students, the conversation flowing naturally between topics. From police procedures to basketball, from civil rights to college plans. Later that day, in Amir's office, they reviewed their reform proposals. The documents had evolved from theoretical frameworks to practical solutions, informed by countless conversations with community members. "We need to address the root causes," Ryan said, surprising himself with how natural these words now felt. "Better training is important, but it's not enough. We need to change the culture." Amir nodded, adding notes to their draft. "The department's resistance is softening. Your example is making a difference, Ryan. Officers who were skeptical are starting to listen." Their work was interrupted by a call from the chief's office. Another city had requested their presence at a police reform conference. Their partnership was becoming a model for other departments struggling with similar issues. "We're not just changing our department," Amir realized. "We're creating a template for national reform." Ryan picked up a framed photo on Amir's desk. Amir with his daughter at her college graduation. "Is this—" "Yes, the same daughter from that night," Amir confirmed. "She's studying law now, says she wants to work on police reform legislation." The moment was interrupted by Officer Chen bursting into the office. "You need to see this," she said, holding up her phone. A video was going viral. Body cam footage from another city showing a violent arrest of an unarmed black teenager. Ryan and Amir exchanged glances. Their work was far from over, but at least now they were facing these challenges together, showing others that change was possible when people were willing to listen and learn from each other. The police brutality video from neighboring Oakland dominated every news channel. As footage of the teenage boy being beaten played on repeat, tension in their own city reached a fever pitch. The timing couldn't have been worse for the department's planned public hearing on reform measures. The city council chambers were packed beyond capacity. Ryan and Amir sat at the witness table, facing a sea of angry faces and phone cameras. The air conditioning struggled against the heat of hundreds of bodies and rising emotions. "How can we trust any reforms when this is still happening?" A woman stood up, holding a tablet displaying the Oakland footage. "My son is the same age as that boy. How do I know he won't be next?" Before Amir could respond, an elderly man rose from the other side. "My grandson is a rookie officer in Oakland. Since that video, he's received death threats. He wasn't even there that night." Ryan gripped the microphone, his knuckles white. "I've been a cop for 15 years, he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I used to think incidents like Oakland were isolated cases, bad apples in an otherwise good system. I was wrong." The room fell silent as Ryan continued. "The problem isn't just individual officers. It's a culture that teaches us to see threats instead of people, that values compliance over community, that measures success by arrests rather than trust." Amir watched his former adversary with newfound respect as Ryan detailed specific instances of systemic problems he'd witnessed. The audience leaned forward, cameras flashing, as Ryan described the subtle ways bias influenced daily decisions. "Last month, I responded to a noise complaint in Brighton Heights," Ryan revealed. "Nice neighborhood, white family having a graduation party. I gave them a warning. The next day, similar complaint in East Side. Black family, Sunday barbecue. I nearly wrote them up until I caught myself. Same situation, different response. That's what we have to change." A veteran officer stood up, red-faced. "You're painting targets on our backs, Mitchell. Every cop in the country is watching their career flash before their eyes because of this witch hunt." Amir intervened. "This isn't about destroying careers. It's about saving lives, both civilian and officer lives. When communities trust police, everyone is safer." The hearing stretched for hours. People shared stories of both police misconduct and police heroism. Through it all, Ryan and Amir maintained their united front, acknowledging problems while emphasizing solutions. As the session concluded, a reporter asked the question everyone was thinking. "Officer Mitchell, given your history, why should people believe your commitment to reform is genuine?" Ryan looked at Amir, then back at the crowd. "Because I'm not just talking about change, I'm showing it. every day, every interaction, every decision. And I'm not alone. More officers are joining us because they see that serving the community and holding ourselves accountable aren't opposing ideas. Outside, as night fell, protesters from both sides continued their vigil. But something had shifted. Small groups from opposing sides were talking, sharing stories, finding common ground in their desire for a safer community. The preparations for the landmark community meeting were in full swing. Amir and Ryan had spent weeks fine-tuning their comprehensive reform proposal, which would introduce body camera requirements, civilian oversight boards, and mandatory de-escalation training. The city buzzed with anticipation. Then the video dropped. It appeared first on Twitter, then spread like wildfire across all social media platforms. The footage, from 3 years ago, showed Ryan Mitchell at a private police union meeting. His words echoed through thousands of shares. These community complaints are garbage. They don't understand what we deal with. If they don't like how we police their neighborhoods, maybe they should try policing themselves. The clip continued with Ryan making dismissive comments about civilian oversight and racial sensitivity training. Within hours, what Mitchell exposed was trending nationally. Amir's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Community leaders demanded explanations. Reform supporters felt betrayed. The press camped outside the police headquarters, hungry for comment. Ryan sat in his car, staring at his phone as messages poured in. Some officers praised his old stance, while others distanced themselves. His daughter had texted, "Dad, please tell me that's not really you in that video." When he finally walked into headquarters, the hallways fell silent. Officer Chen, who had become one of his strongest supporters, couldn't meet his eyes. Just before the emergency press conference, Amir found Ryan in the break room. The tension was palpable. 3 years is a long time, Amir said quietly. "I was wrong," Ryan replied, his voice hoarse. "But who's going to believe that now?" "I do," Amir responded, surprising both of them. "Because I've seen you change. Not for the cameras, not for publicity, but in the small moments when you thought no one was watching." Amir stepped to the podium first, facing the hostile press corps. "Yes, I've seen the video. And yes, it's disturbing. But let me tell you something else I've seen. I've seen an officer confront his own biases, challenge his own assumptions, and work tirelessly for real change." The reporters erupted with questions, but Amir wasn't finished. "I have my own confession," he continued. 20 years ago, as a young officer, I turned a blind eye to misconduct in my unit. I was part of the problem before I became part of the solution. Change is possible, but only if we allow people the space to grow. The room fell silent as Ryan approached the podium. His prepared statement lay forgotten in his pocket as he spoke from the heart. "That video shows who I was," he admitted. "I'm not proud of it. But it also shows why we need change. Not just in policies, but in hearts and minds, including mine." Outside, protesters gathered, their chants divided between calls for Ryan's resignation and support for his transformation. The reform movement teetered on the edge of collapse, 3 years of progress threatened by 3 minutes of archived video. The grand community meeting that was meant to celebrate reform instead became a tribunal. The auditorium crackled with tension as Officer James Reeves, Ryan's former partner, took the stage. "You all think Mitchell's had some great awakening," Reeves sneered. "Let me tell you about the real Ryan Mitchell." He proceeded to detail years of questionable stops, selective enforcement, and unwritten department practices that had systematically targeted minority neighborhoods. The audience gasped as Reeves revealed documentation, text messages, unofficial quotas, coordinated patrol patterns designed to maintain pressure on specific communities. Ryan sat rigid in his chair, each revelation landing like a physical blow. But then Amir Carter stood up, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Before anyone casts the final stone," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Let me share something I've never made public." The room hushed as Amir described his early years on the force. "In 2002, I witnessed fellow officers planting evidence. I said nothing. I was the only black officer in my precinct, trying to prove I belonged. My silence made me complicit." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Amir continued, "But that's not the end of my story. And this video, these revelations, they're not the end of Ryan Mitchell's story either." Ryan slowly rose to his feet. His hand shook as he reached for the microphone, but his voice was steady. "Everything Officer Reeves said is true," he admitted. "But he left something out: the names." One by one, Ryan began identifying officers who had participated in discriminatory practices, including several high-ranking officials present in the room. He detailed specific incidents, dates, and patterns of behavior that implicated dozens of officers. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Ryan declared. "I'm asking for accountability, starting with myself." He removed his badge and placed it on the podium. "I accept whatever consequences come with my actions, past and present. But if we're going to have real change, it can't stop with me." The room erupted in chaos. Several officers stormed out. Others sat in stunned silence. Community members alternated between outrage at the revelations and appreciation for the honesty. Amir stepped forward again, placing a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "This is what real reform looks like," he announced. "Not perfect people, but people willing to confront their mistakes and work for genuine change." In the days that followed, the department underwent its most significant transformation in history. Several high-ranking officers resigned. An independent commission was established. New policies were implemented with real enforcement mechanisms. Ryan faced suspension and review, but remained part of the reform process as a civilian consultant. His testimony led to departmental changes that became a model for other cities. 1 year later, at a small ceremony marking the anniversary of the reforms, Amir and Ryan stood together again. Crime rates had dropped. Community trust was slowly rebuilding. Real change was happening. "Sometimes," Amir told the gathered crowd, "the biggest steps forward start with the hardest truths. We're not finished, but we're on the right path, together." Ryan looked out at the faces in the audience, officers and citizens, skeptics and supporters, and saw something that had been missing for too long: hope.